One of Vladimir Zelensky's chief aides has just admitted there was a peace deal on the table that could have been signed. Then all of a sudden, the West got involved, ensuring that billions of dollars of your money was spent sustaining a war that cannot be won. So who benefited from it, and why wasn't it prevented when it could have been? Hello there, you Awakening Wonders. Thanks for joining us on our mutual voyage to awakening together. Here we are on the very precipice of leaving the material plane of understanding to transcend to new realms, better realms where perhaps some of this craziness will make sense. And if that sounds like woo-woo claptrap to you, then consider what the logistical, rational, material world is based on. Principles such as this. There was a peace deal on the table. Russia said, if Ukraine don't join NATO, there won't be a war, we can have peace. And then Boris Johnson and all sorts of other balmy statesfolk with connections to the military-industrial complex got involved, ensuring that billions of dollars of your tax money ended up being spent on this conflict, which many would say cannot be won. It can never be successfully completed by Ukraine. Let's have a look at how we've got here, why we've got here, and how this relates to other conflicts around the world and the institutions that are governing our lives, and who's responsible for reporting the truth to us. This is from Ukrainian TV, in particular a show called 1+1 = War.
Мета української делегації була затягувати процес. Мета російської делегації яка була?
Мета російської делегації була, на мій погляд, показати, вони дійсно майже до останнього сподівалися, що вони нас дотиснуть на підписання такої угоди. Щоб ми взяли нейтралітет. Це було найбільше для них.
What's important about this is its confirmation for the first time from within Zelensky's inner circle that a peace deal was an option, and that what provoked this conflict was Ukraine's intention to join NATO. There's been speculation before in Ukrainian media and the world media, subsequently the type of media that tells the truth, and God knows that's a limit in space these days, that there was a peace deal and that Boris Johnson scuppered it. But this is someone who works very closely with Zelensky, admitting Russia were willing to do a peace deal if you just get rid of those Nazis and don't join NATO. So whatever you think about those ideas and Ukraine's right to join NATO, you have to contrast that with everything that's gone on in the subsequent couple of years from an economic cost and the cost of human life, and say, was it worth it?
Справа, щоб вони готові були закінчити війну, якщо ми візьмемо, як Фінляндія колись там, нейтралітет і дамо зобов'язання, що ми не будемо вступати до НАТО.
Тільки один пункт.
Ну, фактично, ключовий пункт був цей. Все інше там косметичні політичні приправки, типу про...
There are a few points about denazifying the place. No one likes Nazis. Well, most people don't like Nazis. That's extraordinary, isn't it? It seems like the key point, get rid of the Nazis and don't join NATO. Seems like a good deal to me.
Денацифікацію, російськомовне населення і бла-бла-бла.
I think I can translate blah 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 for you. I think that means etc. etc.
Чому Україна не погодилася на цей пункт?
Ну, по-перше, для того, щоб на цей пункт погодитись, треба змінювати Конституцію. Наш шлях до НАТО записаний в Конституції.
So Ukraine have joining NATO as a part of their constitutional agenda.
Більш того, коли ми повернулися з Стамбулу, приїхав Борис Джонсон до...
It's ridiculous to hear Boris Johnson crop up in this story that's led to this terrible, terrible war, because if you're English, you know who Boris Johnson is. He was mayor of London. He was suspended from a zip wire. He's a prankster, and words that rhyme with that, and not someone that should be trusted with world peace, given what he's done to his own haircut.
І сказав, що ми взагалі не будемо з ними нічого підписувати. І давайте будемо просто воювати.
Okay, so there you have it. Even though diplomacy is obviously complicated and requires compromise necessarily, you have to remember that this is being contrasted with the countless deaths of Ukrainian and Russian people, decimation of Ukrainian cities, the fragility of global peace, the potential for nuclear war, and of course on the other side, tremendous profits for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and ability to control the domestic population. So why was it that with a peace deal on the table, that process was scuppered? Who benefits from that, and why are we not told this story? Why is it not clear to us that that was a potential outcome from the beginning? Let's delve a little deeper. In a shocking revelation, the head of President Vladimir Zelensky's parliamentary faction, David Arakhamia, said that Russia was ready to stop the fighting had Ukraine agreed to remain neutral, but the West advised Kiev to keep going. That kind of makes sense to me, doesn't it you, that a fragile peace could have been achieved, albeit one in which Ukraine would have agreed not to join NATO, but the West, for reasons of their or our own, decided to push Ukraine into war. Don't you get the idea when you see Zelensky cropping up on the Golden Globes or taking Sean Penn's Oscar? This is very much a person who's being exploited by Western interests that might be difficult to understand if you're involved in a regionalised conflict with a much more powerful nation, with a deep, complex, ethno-national divide and formerly having been encompassed within the Soviet Union. Why, when Ukraine were on the brink of signing a deal, this is someone who was at the peace negotiations, leading the peace negotiations, why suddenly was that process disrupted? Who benefited from that? It certainly wasn't you or the people whose houses burned down in them Hawaiian fires, because that aid money could have gone there had there not been a very profitable, if somewhat detrimental to human life, war hadn't been being waged with Russia. The peace talks took place during the early stages of the full-scale war on the border of Ukraine and Belarus and in Turkey. As you know, we can't bring you this fantastic, groundbreaking, world-changing content without your love, commitment, attention, loyalty, decency and faith. Neither can we make it without our fantastic partners. Today I'm talking about magnesium breakthrough from Bioptimizers, a true game changer in the quest for a better night's sleep. You don't want to lay awake at night worrying about the revolution or society collapsing around you. And now, because it's Black Friday, you've got the Bioptimizers Black Friday mega sale. It's happening right now and it lasts throughout the rest of November. The biggest discount you can get and amazing gifts with purchase are available only on my page, bioptimizers.com/brand with a code BRAND. That's the code you got to use, BRAND, all caps. Choose health over frivolity this Black Friday. You don't need more objects or trinkets. What you need is a good night's sleep to reflect and to dream yourself into a greater level of consciousness. Head over to bioptimizers.com/brand and enter the code BRAND at the checkout and get 25% off. That's bioptimizers.com/brand and enter the code BRAND at checkout to get 25% off. Right, let's get back into our content. Come on. Arakamia said that a shift towards neutrality would require a constitutional change, considering Ukraine's current constitutional commitment to NATO membership. And I'm sure that's a real bureaucratic headache to alter a nation's constitution, but it's not that great to have all of your fighting age males murdered to end up with an army full of the elderly fighting a war that can never be won. Arakamia told Natalia Mosichuk, a Ukrainian journalist, that Russia saw Ukraine's neutrality as a key condition for a potential peace agreement. They really hoped almost to the last that they would put a squeeze on us to sign such an agreement so that we would take neutrality. It was the biggest thing for them, he said. In a way, you can sort of see the perspective of a former world power like Russia, or as it was formerly known, the Soviet Union, yielding power in former territories like Ukraine on the basis of neutrality. You can't imagine that the United States, as is often argued, would be happy to see Mexico or Canada forming alliances with Russia or China and joining trade agreements or military organizations with affiliations to. I mean, look how ferociously the United States will defend the dollar as their global currency. It's not something they're just going to give up easily. Look at the involvement in various global conflicts right now. World diplomacy is a pretty complex thing to contemplate, and I suppose if there was a fragile and nascent peace offering available, it should have been pursued and investigated. The idea that the West somehow disrupted it is worthy of inquiry. Where's the investigative journalism into subjects like this? Why are people not investigating what the hell went on with Boris Johnson going over there? Why would that be? Is there any connection to the sort of subsequent deals with BlackRock for rebuilding Ukraine after the war? What is the intention of the United States? Why does Ukraine have these curious relationships with significant political figures like Joe Biden? What are these biolabs across the Ukraine? Why is Ukraine being set up as a kind of European battleship to agitate Russia? You notice how America likes to set up military bases around all of its enemies and infringe on all of its enemies and seems to somehow benefit from a state of constant global crisis. Well, is that why those peace deals were scuppered? Is it in any way beneficial to ordinary American people, ordinary Ukrainian people, ordinary Russian people to sustain this conflict? Let me know in the chat what you think. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's unexpected visit to Kiev on April the 9th, 2022 had an impact on the potential ceasefire. Johnson advised against signing any agreement with Russia and encouraged Ukraine to continue the fight. What on earth did Boris Johnson say to agitate these people into an unwinnable war?
Homer, I seen prize fighters couldn't take a punch half as good as you. You know, boxing might be right up your alley.
Arakamiya recalled Johnson's stance, saying Ukraine shouldn't sign anything with them at all, and let's just fight. It's all very encouraging to hear Boris Johnson say stuff like that, but ultimately a significant price has been paid by the American taxpayer and by Ukrainian people more broadly. Are they any closer to achieving those goals? Is the situation any brighter after this counter-offensive that we were all meant to be so excited about? After learning that indeed it was Ukrainian special forces trained by the US that blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, do we feel any closer to a successful conclusion? Can we trust our leadership at all? Can we trust the legacy media and their reporting on it? Do you notice that much like with the pandemic period, there are sort of murmurings, hey, there was a peace deal on the table, and it's just sort of vague and unconfirmed. About a year later, yeah, there was a peace deal on the table. Same with the pipeline. Oh, that pipe, yeah, Russia did that. Won't have been Russia, will it? And then a couple of years later, yeah, sure enough, it was US special forces and Ukrainian special forces. So using that same device, what's going to happen here? Is this war just going to be prolonged, draining the American taxpayer, causing more poverty across America, draining the middle class, killing Ukrainian people, till eventually some sort of terrible, uneasy peace is achieved that somehow benefits energy interests and military industrial interests, and everyone just feels a bit drained and exhausted, and all the promises are lost in the mist of time and the fog of war? Probably. Let me know in the chat. 3 days after Johnson's departure from Kiev, Putin publicly declared that talks with Ukraine had turned into a dead end. Yeah, Boris Johnson has that kind of impact on peace talks. Oh, well, that's that ruined. But there he goes, all tootling his hair and giggling to himself, another war caused. NATO expansion has been underway since the beginning of the war, with the formerly neutral Finland joining in April. Even Finland, you think, they're never going to be involved in any war.
Finland, Finland, Finland.
They're on the edge. They'll probably be involved in something terrible. Boris Johnson will go over. Why don't you start something with Norway? Yeah, I've never liked them.
It's the country for me, so near to Russia.
One thing's for certain, whether you're looking at the Ukrainian constitution or just plain common sense, you want Ukraine in NATO as quickly as possible. But why take my word for it when you could listen to US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin neutrally discussing issues as if he never worked for Raytheon at all and had no ties to their board? He did work for them. He does have ties to their board.
From a military standpoint, Mr. Secretary, how close is Ukraine?
See CNN, why are they not straight away going, this Raytheon thing, is it biasing your perspective on any of this? And do you think it's even right that you've got this job? Why don't they start all interviews like that? Well, you know why, don't you? But let me know in the chat why they don't start interviews like that.
To meeting NATO standards.
Well, there are a number of things that will have to be done. As you know, a big part of their inventory is legacy equipment, and so in terms of training and equipping, there's work to be done. But we're doing that work as we're helping them as they fight this war.
You certainly are helping them. It's costing a bloody fortune.
And so things have been done up to this point.
Things have been done. Things have been done all right. Pipelines have been blown up. People have been trained. Lies have been told.
There's more that will need to be done.
But there's going to be more.
To ensure that they have a full complement of capability.
So you have no doubt that after the war, Ukraine will become a member of NATO?
I have no doubt that that will happen.
So essentially what's been declared there is a perpetuation of this conflict with Russia because Ukraine simply must be included in NATO. I know I don't know enough about global politics, but what do they do in NATO? They got like a really good health club or something. Do you get massages? What's so good about being in NATO? All they seem to do is agitate global leaders, albeit dictators, into a state of war. What's so bloody good about it? The tennis. So when Lloyd Austin's not fluffing CNN into further compliance, not that it requires much, he's visiting Ukraine, offering, promising, pledging further aid.
Secretary Austin making that unannounced trip in a symbolic message of what he called
a symbolic message? It's financial. And as a symbol, just a symbol that represents something, here's so much money from ordinary hard-working Americans, the majority of whom don't even agree with this war. Oh, that's a good symbol. If it's a symbol, don't have one that's tied to people's taxes.
America's unwavering support for Ukraine's war against Russia. He also made a high-profile push to keep cash and weapons flowing into the region because there are concerns the international focus appears to be shifting to Israel's war against Hamas. And that feeling is that Ukraine is being neglected.
Hey, we're still doing a war. It's so terrible, isn't it, that wars are competing with one another like stepchildren. Is that what the world's become now? Hey, look at me. Oh my God. Oh, Jesus. No, watch us. Oh God, the devastation. Can we stop having wars? Could we have a peace deal? Well, we did have one peace deal, but we ignored it. We could have given more attention to the war in the Middle East if we didn't even have this war that's simply based on membership of NATO. I don't think it's that beneficial. Get rid of NATO.
Support for its war against Russia is waning, and international resources defenses are being stretched. So the defense secretary delivered a message of reassurance when he addressed leaders upon his arrival.
Do you remember when the legacy media would tell you that it was just a matter of time before Ukraine were victorious? And do you remember the enthusiasm when they tried to make this war a sort of holiday, like it was an AIDS ribbon or like, support health workers? But it's not that. It's a war. It's a war against Russia. So now let's watch the legacy media surmount that hurdle that used to have you labelled a Putin apologist, because that's what you were if you said anything other than support Ukraine. Legacy media's doing it now.
Together, NATO's done an extraordinary job. How much longer do we continue pushing, I think, what many people in the Pentagon would think?
Why don't we audit them and see what they really think? They don't like audits. Oh.
It's the unrealistic goal of Ukraine driving every last Russian out of their country.
It's exactly the right question, Joe.
Well done, Joe. Great work there. Great media work. The other one nodding. That's very good, Joe. I'm just glad to have this job. Joe's getting a pat on the back for pointing out something that independent media were pointing out in the absolute first place. As soon as a war with Russia was suggested, a war with Russia with all their nuclear weapons and Putin's hard iron, cold-blooded willingness to kill and be killed, are you sure that's a good idea? Why has it taken them 2 years? People in independent media from the very beginning were saying, you can't have wars with Russia without a massive cost for human life and the potential for it blowing up. Now, I'm not sort of saying this to sort of big myself up because it's bloody obvious, because it's Russia. I'll say the same thing when it's China or involving Iran and other Muslim nations in this conflict in the Middle East. If this gets worse, it's potentially going to get, it's already dreadful. All this stuff's already dreadful. What we're discussing now is making it worse. That's a good question. And not only that, Joe, it's a good time to ask it, because you've asked it now that we've made all of our money and we're beginning to think it's getting a little out of hand. So thank you, Joe, for not asking this before Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, etc. were able to significantly profit. This is the exact time. Well done. Have a biscuit. Thank you.
Concerns me is when people get disillusioned and increasingly come to where you and I are, that as desirable as it is, it's simply not feasible. They're going to increasingly say, and we're hearing it in the House, we're hearing it in parts of Europe, why should we keep doing this? We're already stretched. We're trying to support Israel. We're worried about Taiwan.
Taiwan, teaser, return of the Sith.
Even if we give everything we need to give or want to give to Ukraine, it still won't lead to success. What I argue, therefore, is the United States needs to have some very direct conversations with Ukraine, with President Zelensky.
Well, that's, I suppose, what the legacy media is. It's the management of information, isn't it? They have to manage it. They amplify information that they want you to respond to, making certain types of violence and certain types of wars visceral and emotional and necessary, distracting you from the constant flow of revenue from your pocket into the Pentagon and into the military-industrial complex. Then when the time is right, okay, start introducing the idea now that this war is unwinnable. It's propaganda. It's the management of information. And of course it's not all like chest thumping and browbeating. It's become a little more sophisticated now and sanitized and rationalized, and sort of mum and dad, the folks next door, sitting telling you comfortably and reliably the information. But it's essentially just propaganda. That is the function of the legacy media. To bait and switch you, to lead you down a pathway, to keep you compliant long enough to drain your resources and drain your spirit. It was exactly the same in the pandemic. Okay, so everyone, we're just going to have to comply. Get the shot, get the shot, get the shot. And then eventually, okay, these shots, it's extraordinary the degree to which they will comply. No wonder all over the world, there's an appetite to ensure that counter-narratives and dissent are completely neutralized and shut down. Because without it, you're just on your own going, this doesn't seem right, but no one else is talking about it. It's just me on my own in my house, slowly going mad and considering antidepressants and more severe measures because the TV's telling me that everything's all right. Well, everything ain't all right. Everything's exactly as you thought it is. It's not worth trusting them. Something has to be done. The state's not my friend. The media's not my friend. Corporations are not my friend. The culture is not my friend. Until we wake up to those facts together, we're just pawns in their game.
Talk about reducing their emphasis on liberating land, increasingly put all their emphasis on holding on to what they've got. In the long run, diplomatically, through sanctions, yes, we can try to see the rest of their territory return. But for right now, let's have 80% of this country safe, 80% of this country rebuilt. I would actually propose a ceasefire.
Did you see him say the magic word ceasefire there? 2 years ago, you couldn't mention ceasefire with this conflict. Why don't we just go to that bit? Why don't we just jump to the bit where we recognise that the answer doesn't come in the annihilation of people, regardless of the symbols, ephemera, badges, religion, ideology, culture, and resources that might lie under the territories involved in the conflicts.
As an interim arrangement to expose the Russians for what they are, so we can rebuild support for Ukraine in this country. But we've had 2 fighting seasons. The idea that 1 or 2 or 3 more years of this is going to result in success, I simply don't see it. Russia's on a war footing. They have access also to arms from North Korea and Iran. So I just think, any time in foreign policy, any time in life, there's a big gap between what you're trying to do and your ability to do it. You've either got to increase your means or lower your goals. And I think here the only realistic option as a tactical measure is to lower our goals.
The situation is often fluid, has been fluid in Ukraine for quite some time. But we're at a new stage, just like we talked about after October 7th. That war was going to go in stages.
Tim saying that about stages, what that's like is in the pandemic. Oh, well, this was the right thing to do then. This was the right thing to do then. No, that's just the way that the information is released. That's what that is. That's to prevent you from saying, hold on a minute, if we're eventually going to get to the point where we have to have a diplomatic and peaceful solution, should we just sort of go straight to that bit? It's not a board game where you have to go around all of the little pieces. That's not what the deal is here. You can go straight to the bit of like, do you want your sons and daughters to stop dying in this conflict? Well, ultimately, yeah. And are you able to overcome the rage and fury that you feel in yourself and recognise that rage and fury is being exploited by interests that are completely outside it, beyond it, and benefit from your rage? Yeah, right. Let's start talking about peace. That's where you're always going to end up. Or there is one other alternative. Let me know in the chat if you know what it is.
Yeah, the Russians had enough time as Ukraine was preparing this offensive to build those defensive lines with trenches and landmines and making it very difficult for the Ukrainians to push through. I was told recently that the Ukrainians have only taken back 0.25% of the land that Russia took in the east of the country. That is nothing.
So it's $100 billion there, $65 billion there, another 100 million, and you can have 0.25 billion. Is that worth it? If you turn it upside down, it says boobless. It's still not worth it.
I guess the only question with what you're proposing, Richard, is that would that then look like victory for Vladimir Putin? I mean, effectively, he'll be able to sell that, and he will sell that as victory back at home. But even if we step back with a more objective eye and think, well, okay, so they didn't take Kyiv, but they took a big chunk of the country in the east, and was this an indication that the Russians actually won?
Oh no, Russia won. There you have it. In a sense, war futile. When peace deals are offered, take them, particularly if it's against a global nuclear superpower, and always be circumspect about the way that legacy media gives you information, not only actually in matters of international conflict, but any matter at all. They'll initially present you with a crisis, they'll present you with a solution, they'll prevent you from analysing it, they'll keep you in highly emotional states like fear or rage. In the end, the solutions will have to be diplomatic, or the alternative, ongoing war, which is beneficial to certain interests, but requires the continual sacrifice of human life. 2 years ago, a choice could have been made. Don't have Ukraine join NATO, it's going to annoy Russia. All the stuff that was talked about in independent media spaces 2 or 3 years ago is now coming out into the legacy media. Why? Not by mistake, but because they're ready to reveal that information now, because they've got another war to be pursuing. They've got another way to funnel your tax dollars into the military-industrial complex. I'm sure that that's a simplification and a reduction of the complexity of those matters, particularly certain aspects of it that are ideological. But as a paradigm, as a template, it certainly makes sense to me. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments and chat? Remember, we stream every day on Rumble at these times. Join us for the conversation. Join us for the fun. Join us for the live chat. It's crazy. You'll love it. More important than any of that, if you can, please stay free. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.